Lyra had always been taught to fear the humans. The elders of her tribe whispered tales of their hunger, how they would devour anything in their path, alien or otherwise. To her, they were nothing more than monstrous predators lurking beyond the stars. But Lyra was different. Small in stature, even by the standards of her kind, she was curious, always searching for answers. When she overheard the Ancient Ones speak of a human crash landing on their world, her heart raced, not with excitement, but with dread. What would happen if they crossed paths? Would he see her as nothing more than prey? Would her fragile existence be snuffed out in an instant? Lyra's worst fears seemed to materialize when, one fateful day, she ventured out to the forbidden forest, her eyes darting nervously as she navigated the dense foliage. She heard rustling in the distance, and her pulse quickened. There! It's him! A towering figure appeared before her, human, just as the stories had described. His presence alone sent a jolt of terror through her, like a sudden gust of cold wind. Lyra froze, her small form barely visible in the underbrush. The human's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to stop. She wanted to run. She wanted to flee as fast as her legs would carry her. But something in his gaze held her in place, a strange mixture of curiosity and confusion. He didn't look like the monster she had been taught to fear. But could she trust her instincts? Could she trust him? For a long moment, the two stood there, eyes locked in a silent standoff. Lyra's breath was shallow, her heart hammering against her chest. The human's face remained unreadable, but his posture softened. Slowly he crouched down, bringing his massive form closer to her level. Lyra's mind screamed at her to run, but her body refused to move. She was trapped between fear and the strange pull of something she couldn't quite understand. Was he waiting for her to make the first move? Or was he truly just as confused as she was? "I'm not here to hurt you," the human spoke, his voice gentle but firm. Lyra's eyes widened. Was he speaking the truth? Could it be possible? She had heard the rumors. The humans never spared anyone. But something about his words made her hesitate. Was he lying? Was it all part of a clever trap? Lyra swallowed hard, still uncertain, but she didn't run. Instead, she took a small tentative step forward, inching closer. She watched his every movement, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. But there was no hostility in his posture. He wasn't reaching for her, wasn't showing any sign of aggression. The human remained still, watching her with a mix of patience and wonder, as if she were the most intriguing creature he had ever encountered. Her breath caught in her throat as the distance between them closed. "What do you want from me?" Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. Fear mixed with a hint of defiance. If he was truly not going to harm her, then what was his purpose? The human's lips curled into a small smile, and for the first time Lyra saw something in his eyes that she had never expected to find. Kindness. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to understand." Lyra blinked in disbelief. Could it really be that simple? Could a human be so different from the stories? Could it be that they weren't all monsters after all? She hesitated, her mind racing as the weight of his words sank in. Could she trust him? Could she open herself up to the possibility that the humans weren't as dangerous as she had been led to believe? The world around them seemed to quiet, the tension between them fading ever so slightly. Maybe this encounter, this unexpected meeting, could lead to something more than fear. Maybe it could lead to something neither of them had ever imagined. The unseen danger. Lyra stood in the eerie silence, her heart pounding louder than the sound of her breath. Every instinct told her to run, to flee to the safety of the trees, but something kept her rooted to the ground. The human, though towering and foreign, hadn't harmed her. He had only spoken words of peace. But what if it was all a lie? What if the stories had been true all along? What if he was just waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Her gaze never left him as he slowly rose to his full height, his hand still outstretched toward her in an unspoken gesture of trust. The sunlight filtered through the dense forest canopy, casting long shadows on the ground. The world around them seemed to grow darker with every passing second. "Are you alone?" Lyra's voice trembled slightly as she asked the question that had been gnawing at her since the moment they met. "Is there more of your kind?" The human's expression shifted slightly. His jaw tightened and a flicker of something dark flashed in his eyes. For a heartbeat, Lyra thought she saw a glimmer of fear in him, as though the question had touched a nerve. But then he exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Yes, I'm alone. My ship." He hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the horizon. "It crashed. I was separated from the others." Lyra's mind raced. If he was telling the truth, then he was stranded, completely alone, with no one to back him up. But if he was lying, if there were more of his kind out there, That would mean danger. And yet she couldn't shake the strange sense of calm that seemed to emanate from him. A low growl suddenly broke the silence, cutting through the air like a blade. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes snapped toward the source of the noise, a rustling in the bushes. Without warning, a shadow darted across the forest floor, followed by another, and then another. Lyra's breath hitched. These weren't the soft footsteps of an animal. These were deliberate, predatory movements, too coordinated to be anything other than a group. Her pulse quickened. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The human's eyes widened with recognition, and his body tensed. "It's them," he said, his voice low, urgent. "The others." Before Lyra could react, the world around them erupted in chaos. Creatures, humans, yes, but twisted and monstrous, emerged from the shadows. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural hunger. They moved like wolves, stalking their prey. The very air seemed to crackle with tension as the creatures circled them, closing in. Lyra backed away, her eyes darting between the human and the advancing figures. The fear she had felt earlier came rushing back, a tidal wave of terror crashing over her. She had never imagined this. The humans she had been warned about, they weren't like this. They weren't supposed to look like monsters. The first figure lunged, but the human reacted with lightning speed. He pushed Lyra aside with one arm, shoving her into the safety of a nearby rock. "Stay down," he ordered sharply. Lyra's mind reeled. She had seen violence before, but this was different. These were humans, her people, but something was wrong. Something had twisted them into these horrific versions of themselves. What had happened to them? Why were they so different? Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash as the human fought back. His movements were sharp and efficient like a warrior, yet there was a weariness in his eyes, a desperation that mirrored her own. He was not the monster she feared, but something far more complex. Could he really be her ally in this? Just as the battle seemed to reach its peak, the creatures hesitated. The one leading them, a large, hulking figure, stared down at the human, its breath ragged and heavy. "You shouldn't have come here," it growled, its voice deep and chilling. "You don't belong. You never belonged." Lyra's heart sank as she realized the truth. They were outnumbered, and she was no longer sure who to trust. Could the human save her? Or had he brought this doom upon them both? The tension hung thick in the air as the creatures slowly began to close in again, and the human, now visibly struggling to hold them off, shot Lyra a glance. His expression was fierce but conflicted. "Run," he mouthed silently, his gaze pleading. "Run?" Lyra's breath caught in her throat. There was no time to think, no time to weigh the risks. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, but she didn't want to leave him. Not now, not when everything was falling apart. But what choice did she have? A scream ripped from her throat as she turned and dashed into the forest, not daring to look back. But her mind raced with thoughts of the human. Who was he? What was he really after? And was she walking into a trap? The suspense was unbearable. Would she survive this encounter? Was the human truly a friend, or had he led her into a nightmare she couldn't escape? If you're as hooked as Lyra in this thrilling tale, make sure to subscribe to Lost in Time and stay tuned for more sci-fi adventures you won't want to miss. A fateful choice. Lyra ran faster than she ever had before, her small feet barely touching the ground as the forest blurred around her. Every muscle in her body screamed, urging her to flee, to get as far away as possible from the nightmare that was closing in. The human's warning echoed in her mind. Run! But her heart twisted with guilt. She hadn't even looked back. She hadn't seen if he was okay. Was he? The thought made her stomach churn, but she couldn't afford to stop. The creatures, those twisted versions of humans, were close. She could hear them, their growls and low voices floating on the wind. She pushed herself harder, but no matter how fast she ran, the fear weighed her down, threatening to swallow her whole. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she ducked and weaved between the alien trees. The dark, foreboding forest around her felt like a prison, its shadows suffocating. She had to find shelter, somewhere to hide, somewhere that could keep her safe long enough to figure out what was happening. Her mind raced. Why had the human done that? Had he truly been trying to save her, or was it all part of some grand deception? She had felt something in his eyes, something real. But this whole situation was becoming more and more impossible to understand. She had never imagined her first encounter with a human would be like this. Could there really be no way out? A sudden snap of branches behind her made her freeze. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. The air felt colder now, and her body trembled, though she couldn't tell if it was from the chilling breeze or the terror that gripped her. A figure emerged from the shadows, a human, but not the one she had fled from. This one was different. His eyes were wild, manic. His skin was covered in dirt and scars, and his posture was jagged as if something inside him had broken long ago. Lyra's stomach dropped. This wasn't the same. The creature's eyes locked onto her with a predatory intensity. "You shouldn't have run," it hissed, a low, guttural sound that made her skin crawl. "You'll never escape. None of us ever do." Lyra backed away slowly, her heart hammering. Where was the other human? The one who had warned her to run? Was he still fighting for his life against these things? Or had he been taken, consumed by the very creatures he had called his own? She swallowed hard, adrenaline surging through her veins. There had to be a way out. There had to be. The creature took a step forward, and Lyra stumbled backward in panic. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't fight it. She was trapped, and the weight of that realization nearly crushed her. But then, just as the creature lunged at her, a blur of motion. A human figure tore through the shadows, tackling the creature with a ferocity that shocked Lyra. The figure spun the creature around, slamming it into the ground with a deafening thud. "Get away from her." The voice was familiar. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. It was him, the human she had run from earlier. With every ounce of strength he had, the human fought back against the creature, his movements sharp, controlled. He wasn't giving up. He wasn't letting go. "Why? Why are you helping me?" Lyra whispered, her voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. The human didn't answer right away. He shoved the creature away with one final powerful blow, sending it crashing into a tree. It groaned and scrambled to its feet, clearly not defeated, but the human had given Lyra a chance to survive. He turned to face her, bloodied but determined. "Because I made a choice, and it was you." Lyra's chest tightened. She didn't know what to say. The words felt inadequate in the face of the sacrifice he had just made. Was this a kindness, or was there something more? "I'll protect you," he said, his voice low and steady, though his body was shaking with the toll of the battle. "I promise you that." Lyra's mind reeled. Could she trust him? After everything? After all the fear? She wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. He had saved her. And now she owed him. The creature, now recovering, let out a guttural roar. The human and Lyra exchanged a brief glance, both knowing this wasn't over. The forest felt smaller now, the shadows creeping closer, as if it too was part of the danger. Lyra's decision was made. She couldn't let him fight alone. She couldn't run anymore. They had to stick together, whatever it took. With one final glance at the human, Lyra steadied herself. "Then let's finish this." The truth revealed. The woods were alive with the sound of pursuit. The creatures, those twisted remnants of humanity, were relentless, their guttural growls filling the air as they closed in once more. Lyra and the human had managed to escape the first wave, but the odds were against them. Every second felt like an eternity. Every breath, every footstep, every rustle in the underbrush sent chills down Lyra's spine. She could feel the human's presence beside her, his strength, his determination. But there was something else in the air tonight, something darker, something that she couldn't quite grasp. Why hadn't he just left her? Why had he stayed and fought? Was it really for her, or was there another reason? Lyra dared not ask. Not now. She couldn't afford to lose focus. The creatures were everywhere, and if they were to survive, they needed to keep moving. The human led her deeper into the forest, moving with precision, his every step calculated. He seemed to know where he was going, as if he'd done this before. "You're doing well," he muttered, his voice raspy but confident. "Just keep moving." Lyra didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mind was racing, her body shaking with exhaustion. They had been running for hours, and every path they took seemed to lead them deeper into danger. The shadows seemed to stretch longer with each passing moment, the forest growing denser, darker. Suddenly, the human stopped dead in his tracks. Lyra almost collided with him, but he raised his hand to signal for silence. He was listening. "What is it?" Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. The human's eyes flicked around them, scanning the surroundings. His hand gripped a knife, a small but deadly weapon. He looked at Lyra, his gaze sharp. "Something's wrong," he said softly. "We've been followed." Lyra froze, her breath caught in her throat. She strained to hear what the human had sensed. But the forest was too quiet, too still. Then, without warning, the earth beneath their feet began to tremble. A deep, low rumble reverberated through the ground like the heartbeat of some massive creature. Lyra's pulse quickened. "What is that?" she gasped, her voice trembling with fear. The human's eyes widened. "We need to move, now." But it was already too late. The ground split open with a deafening crack, and a colossal figure emerged from the depths, its form massive, covered in dark, jagged armor. It was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. It looked human, but it wasn't. It was something far worse. The creature towered over them, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of teeth sharp enough to tear through steel. Its voice was a low growl, distorted by what Lyra could only describe as an unnatural power. "You shouldn't have come here," the creature said, its voice like gravel grinding underfoot. "You're not supposed to know." Lyra's heart dropped into her stomach. No? What did that mean? The human stepped forward, his posture defensive. "We didn't choose this," he said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "This isn't what we wanted." The creature's laugh echoed through the forest, a chilling sound that made the hair on the back of Lyra's neck stand up. "You don't have a choice," it hissed. "This is the truth you were never meant to know." Lyra's mind raced. She glanced at the human, his face hard with determination. But even he seemed unsure. There was a strange, almost painful tension between them, as though the human knew something he hadn't yet told her. "What truth?" Lyra asked, her voice shaking, desperate for answers. The creature's gaze flicked to her, its eyes narrowing with dark amusement. "The truth about who you are," it said, its voice dripping with malice. The words hit her like a blow to the chest. "Who I am." Before Lyra could ask what it meant, the creature lunged. The human moved fast, shoving Lyra out of the way, taking the brunt of the attack. She watched in horror as the creature's claws slashed through the air, narrowly missing her protector. The human staggered back, blood pouring from a wound on his side. But he didn't stop. He wouldn't stop. "Stay back," he shouted to Lyra, his voice strained. "Get to the cave, now!" Lyra hesitated, torn between staying with him and running for her life. She had never been more terrified, but she knew what she had to do. The human needed help, but in that moment she realized he was hiding something from her. Something about the truth of why this was happening. The cave, just ahead, seemed like their only hope. But with the creature's growls growing louder, Lyra didn't have time to think. Her legs moved before her brain could catch up, and she sprinted toward the cave, not daring to look back. But as she entered the dark opening, a terrible thought seized her. Would she ever see him again? The truth is finally within reach, but will Lyra be ready to face it? And who is the human really? You don't want to miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more.